How's it going, guys? Will here. iPhone 6s or iPhone 7, which of these two phones should you buy in 2020? Well, seeing as there's no perfect one-size-fits-all phone for everyone, that's the question we're going to try to answer in today's video. This video is not going to be telling you which exact phone you should buy, but I am going to provide some recommendations nonetheless, and hopefully by the time this video is over, you'll be ready to make an informed decision on which iPhone you want to buy in 2020. Alright, so first of all, let's take a look at the specs. The iPhone 7 features an Apple A10 processor, while the iPhone 6s uses the older A9 processor, which would make sense, as the iPhone 6s was released a year before the 7. Now, we're going to be talking more about what this means in terms of performance later on in the video, because there are a few differences despite these CPUs only being a year apart. Both have that 750 by 1334 display resolution. However, the iPhone 7 actually has a slightly brighter panel, 705 nits, 550 nits. Both have multiple storage options, going from 16GB on both to 128 on the iPhone 6s and 256 on the iPhone 7. The 7 also has a slightly bigger battery rated at 1960 mAh versus 1715 mAh on the 6s. Finally, the 7 is slightly lighter than the 6s, weighing in at 138 grams versus 143 grams on the iPhone 6s. Initially, we can see that in most areas there are some subtle improvements. However, traditionally iPhones aren't all that spec dependent, so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out in terms of real-world performance. Following this, we have build quality. Now, again, this is an area where there are more subtle upgrades that may not be immediately obvious, but some of these upgrades are pretty nice. Both the iPhone 6 and 7 use 7000 series aluminium, which is a super durable, nice, and premium feeling alloy that very much adds to the build quality, and so subsequently, neither of these phones have a problem with bending, like, another iPhone in recent history. Do you remember how bad that was? That was a real problem. The 6S also introduced the ion exchange process for the screens, overall making them more durable and, in theory, reducing the risk of them cracking. Now, I did break my iPhone 7 screen, but as I've said before when I've talked about this was most likely due to a faulty screen protector. I have unfortunately dropped the 6S a couple of times without a screen protector or a case, and it hasn't cracked, which is good. Now, this could have been, and most likely was, just luck. These things will still break if you drop them wrong, so I do still thoroughly recommend getting a phone case. In terms of the areas where the iPhone 7 actually pulls ahead, the camera, despite still sticking out, was actually the first in the iPhone line to use Apple's pure sapphire technology. Now, it is still up for debate on how accurate that term is, but in terms of pure performance, if we take a look at the surrounding paint on the camera, we can see that it's slightly scratched. However, if we take a look at the lens itself, no scratches. Very important, because a scratch camera lens, tons of problems, and while some of them can be fixed in post, it's just better to avoid them altogether. It saves time and it makes your life a lot easier. The iPhone 7 was also the first in the iPhone line to feature an official IP rating. Specifically, the iPhone 7 is rated at IP67. This means you can survive for an hour in up to a meter of water. And don't get me wrong, while this isn't something to rely on, it's a nice failsafe all the same. Just make sure you don't go scuba diving with it. That could cause quite a few problems. I don't think it covers that. It's not all good for the iPhone 7 though. As with the matte black version, which I have here, there is a problem with the paint coming off. I've spoken to multiple iPhone 7 users, and most of the ones who have got the matte black color have had this problem. The silver one doesn't seem to though, and as long as you put a case on it and properly maintain it, then this shouldn't be a problem. Overall, both phones have a nice premium feel, are built to a high quality, and while the iPhone 7 does bring along that pure sapphire lens and IP rating to give it the slight edge, it really is up to you whether you want to spend the extra. My voice is going. I need to go get some water. Hold on. Next up, we're going to be talking about the screen. While they both share the same 750 by 1334 resolution, which, if we're being honest, isn't all that much in 2020, there is a pretty nice increase in brightness on the iPhone 7. 705 nits versus 550. Now, these numbers do vary based on what source you use. For this video, though, I'll be going off the DisplayMate brightness test. The increased brightness on the iPhone 7 is nice. It does make a pretty significant difference outside on bright days, so if you do use your phone outside a lot, then this may be a consideration. Both the 7 and the 6S feature the traditional 9:16 aspect ratio. Now, I personally do prefer the 18:9 aspect ratio. I mean, nowadays it's pretty much the standard, but it is a nice aspect ratio for watching videos, as most people do still shoot in 16:9. I mean, this video isn't, but people should start shooting 18:9. It's much nicer. Now, neither of these phones feature True Tone. That didn't come along till the iPhone 8, but realistically, this isn't a huge deal. Both phones have a 1400:1 contrast ratio. Put simply, this means that either one of these will be pretty good for some media consumption or gaming. Both the 6S and the 7 have 3D touch, one of my personal favorite features added to iPhones in recent years, and even on these two slightly older iPhones, it still works great. Now, if you're not familiar with 3D touch, in essence, it allows for different actions based on how hard the user presses on the screen. A bit like the haptic trackpads on the newer MacBooks. When I first heard about it, I'm gonna be honest, I didn't use it all that much. Initially, I kind of just wrote it off as a gimmick, but when I actually started to use it, amazing. Carrying out certain tasks like opening features on Instagram, such as the camera, having quick access to music, and most of all, being able to scroll through the text using the keyboard as a trackpad. Game changer. I'm pleased to say that on both of these phones, this feature works great. The engine's nice and tactile, and I haven't had any problems with either. So, which is the better screen? Well, in this category, it's undoubtedly the iPhone 7. The overall increase in brightness is really nice, and just overall makes the phone a little bit more user-friendly on bright days. Moving on, we have button placement. Now, this is an area where iPhones traditionally do really well, and I'm pleased to say that on these two phones, it's honestly some of the best ever. All the buttons on these phones are logically mapped out, with essentials like the volume up and down, an isolated lock button, and the ever essential mute switch. It's honestly got to the point where I rely on that mute switch. Just having the ability to mute my phone at the flick of a switch, seriously, absolutely incredible when I need to mute my phone. There are a few differences between the two, some obvious, some not so obvious, so let's talk about those. First of all, the iPhone 6s has the volume buttons indented in a groove, whereas on the iPhone 7 they're isolated and stick out on their own. I personally prefer the more isolated feel. It's easier to be more direct, and while the indent can make the phone look a little slicker, I personally prefer being able to more intuitively interact with my phone. The antenna is also now more discreet, which, while not necessarily purely functional, does give the phone a nicer, slicker look. Now we're moving on to the more significant changes. First of all, and one that certainly caused some controversy at launch, this. On the iPhone 6s, there's a nice and traditional headphone jack at the bottom of the phone, which lets the user plug in a pair of 3.5mm headphones. Whereas on the iPhone 7, this is nowhere to be seen. On the iPhone 7, you have to either use wireless headphones or get the lightning adapter. Honestly, I don't find this to be too big of a deal. I'm kind of used to it at this point, but I know for some people, not having a headphone jack is kind of a deal breaker. The iPhone 6s also features a more traditional mechanical home button, which feels nice and tactile at the box, and will of course click when the phone's off. The 7 featured a new haptic home button that could be set to one of 3 tactility settings. I personally like and recommend setting 3 as it's the most tactile, but I recommend trying them all out and finding out which one works best for you. Now again, some people do swear by the mechanical home button, but there were some benefits to the new home button. First of all, it's solid state, so less moving parts always means less to get broken. Another benefit is that it's actually easier to click due to it being more sensitive. Again though, a lot of this is down to preference, so I recommend thinking about which one you prefer and taking that into decision when choosing between these phones. Overall, as I said, both do really well in this category. All the buttons are well placed and you can't really go wrong with either. After this, we're going to be looking at a big aspect of modern phones, the camera. First of all, let's take a look at the specs of these cameras. Both have a single 12 megapixel f2.2 aperture camera, and on paper, they look fairly similar. But in terms of performance, there are some key differences. First of all, we're going to be talking about these cameras from a photo perspective. Then later on, we're going to move on to talking about how these things fare in video. First of all, the iPhone 7 does have slightly better colors and a faster max shutter speed, but one area where the iPhone 7 definitely pulls ahead is in low light. Historically, phones have never been that good in low light due to the relatively small sensors. Fun fact, that's also the reason why phones don't get that background blur like DSLRs do. In low light, the iPhone 7 is brighter and cleaner in terms of noise. Now, of course, this isn't even close to the new night mode, but that's not really to be expected, and if you want a great low light camera, then buy a camera. It might be best to look into the iPhone 7. No, seriously, just buy a camera. There are also subtle improvements in dynamic range, colors overall look more vibrant, and the images are a tad clearer. Otherwise, the 6S has a pretty great camera, especially considering its age. The images are nice and versatile, so we can do some color grading and narrow that gap even further. If you want to find out how to do that for free, I made a video on it. Up there. Overall, in terms of the main camera, both are pretty great here, so long as you don't need that second focal length or portrait mode. Moving around to the front, we have the, well, front-facing camera. It was going to be the front-facing camera. There is a 2 megapixel difference, the 7 having 7 megapixels, and the 6S having 5 megapixels, both with an aperture of f1.8. Honestly, do we really need to talk about it? It takes selfies, both look pretty good, but neither of them can really compete in quality with the main cameras. Moving on, we have video. Both shoot 4K at 30 FPS, and while it isn't the same quality as this 4K camera, I mean, of course it isn't, but still, looks pretty good. And with a little bit of post-production, you can take your images from this all the way to this. Both are kind of limited in terms of bitrate, so you can't go ham, otherwise your image would just totally fall apart. But there is a little bit of leeway nonetheless. Colors and dynamic range, again, do look a little better on the iPhone 7, but with video, there's much less of a noticeable difference. In terms of slow motion, both can shoot up to 120 FPS in 1080p and up to 240 FPS in 720p. I personally keep mine and recommend you keep yours in 120 FPS. It's a nice balance between slowness and quality, but if you do need that ultra slow motion of 240 FPS, it is there. Both take a considerable hit on dynamic range, sharpness, and autofocus, and while the autofocus can be fixed with AE lock, neither of these are going near a pro shoot anytime soon. Obviously not. In fact, why am I mentioning this? Because smartphone video has been getting so good in the past few years, a lot of people are just flat out up and ditched their traditional DSLRs, and therefore have consequently started vlogging with their phones. And of course, nowadays the slow motion B-roll is just very much a part of that vlogging world. With these iPhone videos, I try to be as detailed as possible, covering as many possibilities as I can, which is why I wanted to talk about slow motion in terms of quality. It's not all about slowness. Moving on, we have OS and app performance. How well does each phone perform? How well does the OS work? And how long are these phones going to be supported for? Both these phones still run really well in games like Animal Crossing and Coffee Corp. Now, when it comes to the more demanding games, these phones obviously won't do as well as the newer phones. As I said before, they only have 2 GB of RAM, but in most applications, especially social media, which run amazingly well on these phones, by the way, there shouldn't be any problems. Both of these phones are on iOS 13, and at this time, both work great. The UI is smooth, everything feels snappy, and in 2020, both of these phones provide a really nice experience. However, if Apple's usual support cycle is followed, then iOS 13 may end up being the last OS that the 6S sees. Now, there is the possibility that the iPhone 6S could receive the extra year like the 5S did. Realistically though, this is pretty unlikely. This means that you won't get the new features of iOS 14, and eventually app developers will stop supporting your device. As for that last statement, it really does depend on the app developer, and again, according to Mac Rumors, this doesn't happen right away, so whether or not you want to deal with that, and for how long you want to keep your phone for, should be a consideration before you buy the 6S in 2020. On the iPhone 7 side of things, it doesn't have this issue because it was released a year later, so it will almost definitely get that extra year of support. Following this, we have the speakers. At first glance, they look to both just have one downfiring speaker, and you'd be right, they do both just have one downfiring speaker. However, a new feature introduced with the iPhone 7 was stereo mode, in which the top speaker was also used to create this stereo effect. At first, it didn't work great, but after a few software updates, it works pretty well now, and does actually make a difference. To be honest, neither of these phones have great sound quality, they should only be used for casual listening, but I find that in this regard, the iPhone 7 does have a clear edge. After this, we have battery life, and I'm gonna be honest, neither are all that great. The iPhone 7 generally lasts a little bit more consistently, around 5 to 6 hours of general usage, which included social media, watching a few YouTube videos, music, and texting. On the iPhone 6S, you can still get around 5 hours of usage, but as soon as you start watching videos or playing games, anything that's hardware intensive, that battery life will go. Both phones have normal battery health, so in summary, if you end up picking up one of these, you'll need to carry some sort of charger if you're gonna be out with it for more than 5 hours. Alright, so I just changed into the old yellow shirt of doom, the one with the rip in. During the break, I was having a drink of water, and I may have spilt some on my sweatshirt. Gotta look presentable for YouTube. So, which of these two phones should you buy in 2020? Honestly, it depends on your use case. As I said at the start, there really is no one size fits all when it comes to the perfect phone. While the iPhone 6S is significantly cheaper nowadays, it may miss out on iOS 14. So therefore, it's much more likely to go out of support before the iPhone 7. But if you really like the more traditional mechanical feel of a phone, then there may be a case for the iPhone 6S. If you want to keep your phone longer, then I personally pay the premium for the iPhone 7. But if you just want a fun phone, might be for some app development, or maybe you just want to try out the iPhone line in general, then the 6S might be a good option. As always, this is up to you though. Let me know in the comments which one you end up picking. As of now though, thank you for watching. Remember to like the video if you want to see more content like this, and smash that subscribe button. I'm done for now, and I will see you guys in the next one.